Melanie, and I'm the Communications and Network Engagement Manager here at the Ontario Nonprofit Network. If you're new to ONN, welcome. We hope that you're able to enjoy this webinar today. If you're an existing member, thank you so much for your membership. We really appreciate having your support, and we hope that you're able to use some of the other member benefits throughout the year, such as our other webinars, our networking and professional development events, and of course, our public policy and advocacy research. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple housekeeping notes. If you do have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box or the question box on the screen. Additionally, if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, such as a visual lag, we recommend you closing your browser and reopening it. If you're still having issues, please feel free to contact our team at 416-642-5786. And to get us started, while we're waiting for the last couple of people to join, we're going to do a poll to figure out what you are most excited about learning in this webinar. So the options we have for you are: first, are you excited to learn about new approaches to revenue growth and engaging supporters? Are you interested about how partnerships and collaborations are changing? Are you excited to learn about innovative ways to talk about your mission and vision? Are you excited to access key resources that you can use to connect effectively? Or are you most excited to participate and ask questions in our live Q&A session with Paul Nazareth? Wonderful. So it's great to see such an even split across everything. So we're going to be covering all of these topics today. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to share them. And also, just so you know, we will be sending everyone in this webinar the recording and also the slide deck afterwards. Now, I would like to complete a land acknowledgement. So ONN recognizes that we are on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit. This land has been stewarded by many Indigenous peoples for time immemorial, including the Wendat and Haudenosaunee. Toronto is also a part of the Métis homeland and home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. So today, as I mentioned before, we're going to be discussing revenue growth, how to engage supporters, how collaborations are changing, and what resources you can use to have your nonprofit thrive in the new year and beyond. And now I would like to introduce our incredible speaker, Paul Nazareth. Many of you may know Paul, but for those of you who don't, I'm just going to go over some really high-level accomplishments because there are so many that he has. Paul is a leader in Canada's philanthropic sector with over 20 years experience working at all levels of creating capital for social good, including working as a philanthropic advisor at Scotia Wealth, leading rapid growth at Canada Helps as a VP, and serving on Carleton's Masters in Nonprofit Leadership program. Currently, Paul is the Vice President of Education and Development at the Canadian Association of Gift Planners. Paul writes on philanthropy for a variety of publications, as well as appearing on national radio and television to speak about creating a personal legacy through charity. For Paul's full bio, please feel free to go to our website because there are so many more great things that he's done. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us today. We are so grateful for your leadership in the sector and for you taking the time to share your thoughts with everyone.
Great. Well, thank you so much to the ONN team for having me. For those of you that may interact with me in the world of digital media, you know I've kind of been losing sleep over this presentation because it's such a wonderful opportunity to not just share this type of knowledge or pontificate about the year, but actually really curate and to look at the wisdom, the collective wisdom across not just the ONN network, but the incredible knowledge that we have across the country. And so a lot of what you're hearing today is not necessarily my experience and knowledge. I am very actively curating the wisdom, the knowledge, the experience of so many leaders in our sector. One, from an organizational perspective, as you can see here, a lot of the organizations that I'm drawing information, knowledge, and programs from, and leaders who are truly my coaches and for many of us are guides towards operational, activity, advocacy, fund development, all of it across the board. And in curating this knowledge, please know the team is sure that you will get a copy of the presentation, but it's taken me a lot of time, and what I've actually done is curated for you in the resources section 4 whole pages of links and what part of the organization they will deal with. If anybody's ever heard me speak before, I often get in my comments, listening to a presentation by Paul Nazareth is like drinking from a fire hose. And I often tell people, you're not meant to drink from fire hoses. Please don't pick it up and try to drink from it, you will die. So point him at the fire. So what I've literally done is actually broken out the resources for you by finance, by fund development, by advocacy operations, and you can then cut, paste, and share with your team. No one has a brain that looks like this. You don't need to. So please take the pressure off yourself. You'll be able to use the resources and knowledge you glean from this and the insight much better if you share that with your team. And again, I'm going to connect you to these experts and more across the country. The presentation today is called Challenges and Choices, because just rounding 20 years myself in the sector, I've seen so many times where there's an opportunity, there's the material, there's the knowledge, there's even the willingness, but organizations don't make the choice to do it. So I'm going to share a lot of resources and insight with you today. What you and your organization do with it is up to you. But I will warn you about the peril of potential. It's January. We have all the time and potential in the world, but come November every year, what are we scrambling to do or get done? What are we scrambling to do at the end of fiscal, at the end of our strategic plan? So please, don't get paralyzed by the potential. Again, cut and paste, share with teams that are going to take this information and run with it. And we have curated those resources for you. And I hope as well we can further do that in the questions and answers. And let's make it a conversation, not just typical Q&A. So, got the bio there and material, but more importantly, just know I exist in the sector to serve the community. I often refer to myself more as a sector connector. So be it LinkedIn, be it Twitter or Instagram, please connect, and I'm happy to continue to, again, make connections and introductions to those experts who are truly the people doing this work out there. So let's talk about 2020. And the first and most important thing is, what is the water that we are swimming in? There's many of us that just want to jump back to work, want to jump into pick up where we left off, but I got to tell you, we're starting a new decade. Every year I actually, besides the strategic plans that we do in work, I go on a personal retreat. And I go out into the wilderness and really listen and read and think about where we're going. And I think a lot of us lost the fact that this is not just 2020, this is a new decade. A lot of the demographic, a lot of the economic, a lot of the social things that we often work on have a natural cadence, have a bump at the start of the decade where people are open to new things and new ideas. We need to be ready for them. And I gotta tell you, one of the challenges we have is that this next decade is starting in a much different place for the world of social good. You gotta be hiding under a rock if you haven't heard of our friend Anand Giridharadas. His book, Winners Take All, if there was one book I would say is gonna be the book of the year, is the one that actually it's not gonna be always a lot of fun to read, but it's the must read, because you're going to hear about it from your board chair, you're going to hear about it from your donors, you're going to hear about it from your corporate partners, your social partners, because this guy's message, and again, I'm going to paraphrase and I'm going to start being uncharitable. His message is that philanthropy is a tool of evil for a global elite. And actually, in a lot of cases, he's been misquoted. Frankly, I think sometimes he's misquoting himself, because the book is so much more nuanced. I've never read a book that's got so many people I respect in it and so many ideas that I love that he completely frames as negative. He's got an entire chapter called Beware of the Win-Win, and that anybody who's coming to you preaching win-win and no-loss partnerships is not coming straight. And so this is really interesting. And again, Anand has done the tour of the civic boomer millennial sources of influence. Front cover of Time magazine, CNN, 60 Minutes, CBC, NBC, CBC Canada. The Agenda with Steve Paikin, and the new Jon Stewart Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj. So Samara Center here in Ontario. So I've given you several links, not just his book. I would encourage you to start looking at some of the narrative, and reading the book will prepare you for some of the challenges ahead of the year. But one of the reasons why he's so effective and has been so effective in that narrative is because negative always sells, right? That's why all of our funders and all of our board people love the charity top 100 lists and all of that, because there's a winner and a loser. And people want that narrative, and it's not going to help us. I always look for an antidote to those negative frameworks, and we have one. We have an absolute antidote to this. And if there was another must-read book, if there's one, this book in some ways will scare you, but the one that will make you feel we can do it, the one that will save us, is a book actually framed in Indigenous wisdom by a colleague from the charitable sector. Decolonizing Wealth, which I think probably should have been called Decolonizing Philanthropy, by the brilliant former Foundations lead and American colleague Edgar Villanueva, has the roadmap to a positive future. And in fact, he has a whole chapter on Canadian leadership in reconciliation, on Canadian leadership in community and public foundations. There's a lot of Canadian content, and again, it's really framed from our sector. The whole goal and methodology of that world that Anand highlights, that is about exploitation and the fracking of resources in the social goods sector for control and division, is changed in the narrative of Decolonizing Wealth. The concept that, yes, we have been in a negative place, and many of our philanthropists created their capital by extracting it from the people that we are trying to save. But how will that help us go forward? He posits that money can be medicine, and that through creation and belonging, we can move forward. He gives us the roadmap. I highly encourage you to check out this book. Now, our narratives and our baggage from the last decade aren't going anywhere, right? The challenge of overhead, and our colleague Dan Pilata and his Charitable Defense Council, this is an example from the Furniture Bank here in Ontario, all of the lists, they're not going away. And that's still a challenging narrative. But again, if we spend our time on defense and worrying about the shrinking pie and scarcity, we won't find our way to abundance and connecting with donors and the things we're doing positively. And we're making a lot of progress in this. I like to criticize the lists and the people that make them, but I gotta say they've been more involved in the sector and even through ONN and being in dialogue than ever before. When it comes to a narrative, we are really challenged by the corporate sector. Now, all corporations are talking about social good in a way they never have before. The world's leading CEOs are telling us that the future belongs to purpose. I don't know about you, but these are the people that I trust the least to guard and safeguard and help humanity. And I know when we look at what they do, the very structure, and our colleague Brad Hoffman of Spire Philanthropy was a Canadian leader, and along with Chris Bayless has created the Canadian Corporate Partnerships Conference here in Toronto that brings together all those CSI people. And we know their legal structure of shareholder value will always be framed in that profit. And purpose, even with B Corps and all of it, still needs to be front and center in who's doing that. Right, I don't know how many people may have seen the Imagine Canada post at the end of last year, talking about how, and quite frankly, rightly so, that the world of faith has lost the dominant privilege and responsibility of teaching generosity, of teaching stewardship, of teaching social circulation. And Imagine asked the question, will corporations pick up that slack? I think no. But we have to recognize a lot of those organizations are abdicating their responsibility. CBC article from last year talking about how out of about 30,000 faith-based buildings in this country, 1/3 will blink out of existence in the next decade. You know, I work for a faith-based organization, both with churches and faith communities, and I did that because I deeply love them. It's embedded in my DNA. And one of the challenges is that a lot of these institutions have now evolved to a place where they think fundraising is one thing and faith is another. You know, I have accomplished a lot in 20 years, but I can tell you, no one's a prophet in their own home. I suffered a loss over the past couple of weeks where the institution to which I am a season ticket holder, my local church, of which I am on the finance council and board, has scuttled for the third time my efforts to include both generosity, reciprocity, and gratitude. We couldn't put a thank you letter with the receipts because it was going to cost too much money for the paper. And I, as a donor, offered to cover everything, but it would also be too much work. We didn't do it. Our receipts go out to people in a windowed envelope with no gratitude. I offered to go to every service in a weekend, that's 7 or 8 services, and say thank you to the congregation. No asking for money, just thank you. And we canceled that because we don't know how to say thanks without asking. This is a real challenge for a lot of institutions. And just know, I'm not going to talk about fundraising a lot in this presentation, but make no mistake that the future of our connection to the community is based in that circulation, that generosity and reciprocity. You know, I've learned a lot from the ONN community. It's one of the reasons, though, even though my career has been really focused on fundraising and capital, to learn from that advocacy and the network that was built has really taught me a lot about that world of tax-motivated charity and its relationship to traditional corporations and CSR and corporate social responsibility. But for a lot of you here on this webinar who are nonprofits, and one of the great privileges of my work for the Gift Planning Association is to teach in every community in this country. And in the last year, I've been to a lot more suburban, rural, and communities around the country where I see a stronger connection between nonprofits and entrepreneurs. That agility, that size of scale, that hustle attitude for growth, there's a lot more connection there. And so you need to figure out where in the spectrum you're going to find yourself in 2020 and the next decade. And again, building those networks, we need structures, we need roadmaps, and that's a great resource in ONN's Network for Action. So again, these are some of the resources we hope that can help you in that. Again, I get to cross the country now maybe 30, 40 times a year in the teaching that we do, the courses that we hold, the partnerships between networks. And in the past year, we have seen a whole new rise and a whole new understanding of rural philanthropy. I'm going to give you a link to a brilliant set of articles framed in community foundations in the Philanthropist journal, Canada's leading academic journal for the charitable sector. It was a powerful start to research on Canadian rural philanthropy. This is exciting stuff because they're dealing with StatsCan data on rural giving and activity, and the foundations that are framed in those communities that know more are the ones that are going to lead the way. And when we were looking at the size of charity on this call, there was a bit of a split between large organizations and smaller organizations. And if there's anything that I've listened and learned to, because again, I go across the country and I teach and speak, but I'll tell you secretly, it's the whole purpose of it is to listen, to spend time with colleagues and listen and learn and see what they're doing. And there's a revolution in rural and community philanthropy led by network builders like the new nonprofit networks, by Community Foundation, by United Way Networks, to actually understand not just local, provincial, regional, but hyper-local needs and hyper-local solutions. You know, we got to call out our leaders. And there are people and organizations who are looking to have the kind of scope that will help us look into the future. I've curated for you a list of 4 or 5 national leading experts who have just published blogs on organizational structure, foundations and granting, community leadership and nonprofit leadership, and finance administration and risk management in the nonprofit sector. So hopefully quite a number of you will know our colleague, Hilary Pearson, former CEO of Philanthropic Foundations Canada. Please don't call her retired. She is really transitioned into a new leadership role that she is exercising both on the committee from the Canada Revenue Agency for the charitable sector, but now in other leadership roles, and she is generously starting to reflect and share through blogs like this. Many of you will also know Betty Ferreira, leader in nonprofit finance, a great friend to ONN, just published a blog for finance staff looking at operational, leader staff looking at organizational. Our colleagues at Vitrio in the West Coast, who really run one of Canada's most reflective podcasts on breaking down and understanding different trends in the sector. They've got something new for the year. And lastly, probably what was emerging as one of the strongest voices in social good of 2019 is the organization Future of Good. And it's really wonderful to see that they've curated this list of next generation leaders across the country. Pretty darn great to see one of the ONN team in this Future of Good list, as well as other leaders across the board. So I've curated that for you to actually take a look at some of those trends in those areas of their expertise: foundation, finance, organizational, granting, operation. The next thing, besides the narrative, the overall, again, the water we swim in, is the choice. You've probably heard the overused quote, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That's a choice. A lot of organizations say, this is what we're trying to do this year. This is how we're trying to advance. We're going alone. But there's a lot of talk of merger culture, of collaborative culture, of shared platforms. What does it look like? How's it happening? And truly, when I travel the country, I'm huddled in those back rooms asking colleagues, tell me about this shared platform work you're doing. Why is this organization merging nationally, locally, all of it? And in the past 2 years, there hasn't been anything I've seen that is a better resource, especially for smaller regional organizations to understand, because national federated networks do this naturally. Large national organizations have partnership staff. But what do the rest of us do? Small organizations, regional organizations, independent nonprofits. And Lisa Watson's work, the leader at Openly, with the Ontario Nonprofit Network last year, her article, Leveraging the Power of Networks, has been one of the absolute rallying cries of network and capacity building for the sector. If you haven't seen it, we got a link for you. And the other one is, what does shared platforms and collaboration look like? I can tell you, when we talk to CPA, that merger culture, and a lot of it, both in federated organizations, national charities and nonprofits, has not been going well. It's not an easy process. We've got independent groups seeding from their own federations because it's not going to be an easy thing. But when we look at positive case studies, it's interesting. You wouldn't think an organization like the United Way would have shown such flexibility and agility, but they're regional mergers of metropolitan centers and regional centers has probably been one of the best case studies from the CPA and risk management standpoints in that merger culture. But for people who can't do that, they're not like-minded organizations. They're mismatched between nonprofit and charity. The Shared Platforms Guidebook from the ONN has been one of the most helpful resources we've seen. From that standpoint as well about choice, a lot of what I get to do in capital raising is working with the establishment, established donors, established leaders, the people with money. And one of the challenges for a lot of small organizations, community organizations, and actually not charity, but nonprofit. Again, we got to say 177,000 nonprofits, 86,000 charities. That tax receipt used to be a barrier. And actually for the next generation coming up, it's less of a barrier. I have to tell you, this is very hard for me to say as the Vice President of the Canadian Association of Gift Planners. More Canadians don't know about the tax benefits we have in this country. Canada has the single greatest charitable tax credit system in the Western world, better than the United Kingdom, better than the United States. And 85+% of Canadians say they give, only 20 and change use the benefits. So if the benefits aren't the barrier, then what? We can't connect to the establishment. A lot of us in grassroots organizations don't have those networks. And the new way, if you can't find them, build them yourself. We are in an exciting time. Looking at an example of the Toronto Foundation, which people think is big, but is not the biggest community foundation in this country, has really taken a scrappy mentality towards this to create what's called Vision 2020, to create and educate and guide a new generation of young philanthropists, both business owners and community activators. The Quarter Club is from the United Way of St. John. And this is our colleague in New Brunswick, where they're banding together small business, talking about social investment, not just giving. This is a really powerful thing that everybody can do. Stop trying to call Oprah. Don't call the usual suspects. When I started out in fundraising, I was told, Paul, go to the golf tournament, find the Beamers and Benzes, and then see who drives them and ask them for money. And we know in 2020, they don't own those vehicles. It's Bob and Judy who've been managing the front desk that are your biggest major gift prospects, but it is the young professionals who are really the opportunity for the future. And how do you get them? Brand them. Bring them in, make them part of the family, and they'll grow up with you, and they will give too. Fact is, we also have to take a look at Canadian demographics. And as we turn the corner to this next decade, and we're just about to release some new research that we as CGP have done with Environics. Not going to talk about it today because it's about legacy giving, but one of the social elements is that the civic generation, the 70 and 80 plus, are now in this final stage of their lives where a lot of their decision making around philanthropy is done. We're not going to be able to influence this generation when it comes to giving in the way that we used to. We are now entering the era of baby boomer philanthropists. That's not going to be easy. Again, the largest amount of capital in Canadian history was the civics. The baby boomers have told us, I watched how they live. They saved their whole lives. They didn't enjoy it. They're leaving with money that, yes, I will inherit, but they weren't happy. And the baby boomers have told us, I'm riding this thing into heaven with the wheels coming off. I'm going to spend it all. But it's also a generation that has told us, through research like Imagine Canada's 30 Years of Giving, through psychographic research that we have from the Muttart Foundation and Imagine, that they're not just going to spend it all, they're going to give it, but they're not going to be donors, they're going to be social investors. That's just fancy language for donors, but it means that they're going to be more involved. Look at the original cast of The Dragon's Den. Look at the current cast of The Dragon's Den. The millennials have made it. Look, we got to come to terms with the fact that golf is a dying thing. Who's golfing anymore, right? The viral article this week in Charity Nonprofit is the rise of gaming streaming marathons and how much money it's raising for charity. Who's golfing anymore? Of course, as a Gen X, always remember, while the baby boomers and millennials fight, there's a small demographic in the middle, and we hate both of you. So in the end, this is two things that many people despise, but in fact, golf and gaming is where it's going to be at. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the breakdown of our demographic, and how can we engage people where they're at? We are going to go through a big change. It's going to be really hard for a lot of people and communities to let go. And again, I'm not saying stop the golf tournament. We have to recognize what's changing in these demographics. Now, we also have to recognize as well, what is our capacity? I was at a wonderful fireside chat with the incredible catalyst person, Bill Young of Social Capital Partners here in Toronto. And he was talking about systems change, about his experience over the past number of decades. And an audience member asked him to say, yeah, but who's doing that work? And are we employing them justly and well? And they talked about women in the sector. And it was wonderful to hear several hands go up and cite Pamela Uppel here of ONN and talk about the work being done in decent work and how we work with the sector. If you are not following that, you are not going to have the capacity that you need in this next decade to do the best you can. I can tell you, I do a lot of work in my networking life, and most people know me as someone very active in networking and connecting. But again, as a fundraiser, I'm thrown out to the world and asked to raise capital. So networking is a job skill. And I see so many executives who are trying to escape that corporate world and think they're going to come over to nonprofit. You've talked to them. They look at the salary, they look at the hours, they look at what they got to give, and it's not a right fit. They're going to go into semi-retirement and consulting. They're not going to work with us. Again, we have to raise another generation of nonprofit leaders, and more of them will be women. And we need to have that just work, that decent work, and what does it look like is the question. And it's been exciting to see as I sit down with HR leaders and the people who are building capacity to say to what's working. If you can see on the screen here, I've given you both resources, the report, but also the decent work checklist, which now I see people integrating into their performance management, into their hiring questions and practices. This is the one that's going to help you for 2020. But the other side of this is, what do you do with the people working for you? I don't know how many people in this webinar have heard of the incredible resource launched last year in Retain and Gain, a workbook for nonprofit talent management, retention, and performance development. It's not a book. It's not a novel. It is a workbook, and it was banded together by an incredible set of leaders like ONN, Laidlaw Foundation, Counseling Foundation, our colleagues at Imagine Canada. They came together to make this book for the sector, and they covered it so that it was free. It is a free downloadable workbook. I've given you the link to help you with performance management, development, talent, your own teams. This is the roadmap for retention in the next couple of years. Now, it's been a gigantic exercise. And last year, I cut down on my Netflix streaming and I started watching CPAC, which means I was drinking more coffee, and following the Senate study of the charitable sector. And now we have the report. We've got the follow-up body that's meeting. There's a lot in there which we need to look at, carve up, and say, what are we going to be involved in? But that's typical sector activity. You know, I want to thank a lot of you on the call who are part of the ONN network and actually from national nonprofit networks who coach me because you've been through this before. We've got peers who've been in the sector 40, 50 years who've really helped me to understand the cycles that are involved in this. And yes, as the Gift Planning Association, CAGP, we will be leading some of the capital elements of donor advised funds, etc., securities and asset transfer, but there's a lot on there that we still need to do in our networks. And I got to tell you, when I look at all the resources out there, two really helpful reads this year from a lot of leaders that I talked to are problem and solution. One of the greatest problems in the nonprofit sector, in the social and civic community, is trust. And one of the things that actually really bothers me is we constantly look to the outside for help, to American leaders and examples for help, when we've got everything we need right here. Trust by David Johnston was one of the most powerful books of the last year. Again, with the context of Rito Hall and his charitable initiatives, the fact that he's been the leader of several different charities, and he has that Canadian cultural context and the nonprofit sector context, and includes that in the book on how do we rebuild trust with current and next generations. It's been really wonderful to see something that understands us so well, that gives us a tactical roadmap to rebuild, and that will help with advocacy, that will help with impact, that will help with funding. I encourage you to take a look at this book. The other one is called New Power by one of the co-founders of Giving Tuesday, Henry Timms. You know, I'll share with you that one of the greatest things I got to do in the last decade when I joined Canada Helps in 2014, we were 12 people raising $50 million. I don't know if you saw, they just put out, left last year, but the team this past year, now just a little under 60, last year raised $222 million, mostly for small charities across Canada. It was a really thing that I was proud to be a part of. But in that, in 2014, was year 2 of Giving Tuesday. And to watch that movement grow, to be part of that Giving Tuesday movement and going all across the country with the real core people. Giving Tuesday in Canada exists because Marina Globovic, the CEO of Canada Helps, Liz Hugerson, and Woodrow of Give3 put that time in. It was also a masterclass in the opposite of how we do things. New Power is all about the opposite of how we exist today. A lot of our associations, and I'm very aware that I'm speaking as the VP of a membership-based association, a 1980s, 90s concept. It's hard to say that, but it's the truth. And New Power is about gaining power by giving it away. It's about lifting up communities by creating neutral, porous connectivity. You know, the other co-founder, Asha Curran of the 92nd Street Y, just put out this article that I've shared with you in the resources called "What We Need for the Future of Social Good is Radical Generosity." And that the purpose of Giving Tuesday was never money. You know, the founders really lament how much everybody has made it about that. It's not called Donate Now Day, it's called Giving Tuesday. We need generosity, volunteerism, social engagement, civic engagement. This is the future of New Power. And again, they've laid out a roadmap. If you're doing strategic planning in 2020, this is the book you want to read. As we get it closer to the Q&A, and again, I hope that you're loading up on questions and you're going to share it with the group, because I hope to have a good discussion about this. My last 2 ideas, again, are about now what do we do? Number 1, who's going to pay for all this? The number 1 document of the past 2 years that we share with government, with the municipalities, is the Imagine Canada report from the chief economist for the social sector called The Social Deficit. If there's anything you need your boss or your board to read on why you need more resources in budget, Imagine Canada has given you the artillery, has given you the ammunition. Again, we've got a chief economist for the social sector. Who knew that? Imagine Canada has employed Brian Emmett, who has done incredible work, and his document, The Social Deficit, is the one you want to lob up to the Boston board that will give you the ability to pay. Again, we are so proud, and I was very proud to be part of Canada Helps during this growth. Really exciting to see the 2019 activity, but you'll see that little line in there that also talks about how much was given using the publicly listed securities. It was the joy of my life as a volunteer with the Gift Planning Association for the past 20 years, of which I am now the National Vice President, to see the growth of asset-based giving. And last year of that 222 million, almost 50 million of it was in stocks. Is your organization ready for that? And again, this is not about fundraising. This is about respecting your donors. In 2020, more of your donors are older than they are younger, and they hold their wealth in assets, not cash. You're going to have donors that are saying, I don't have the cash for groceries. I'm going to have to do something like pull money out of an investment, stocks, RSPs, RIFs to give to you, and the government has given us tax benefits to do that. But if you're not ready to talk about it and receive them, then all you're asking for is cash. And if you're asking for cash from an 80-year-old, not going to get it. Take a look at the stats that we see from the 30 Years of Giving report again. Imagine Canada, Rideau Howell Foundation, 30 Years of Giving report, incredible insight. And the scariest one is that giving from individuals is going down, while donations and tax-motivated giving is going up. More money from less people. You're darn right we're in crisis. But for those of you on the line from smaller organizations, from nonprofit organizations, again, we're hearing more and more that Canadians don't necessarily care about the typical tax benefits and receipts and all that. They just want to do good. And if you empower them to do so, you're going to get that money. Look, we got to ask the tough questions. What about crowdfunding? Crowdfunding in Canada is surging to the billions of dollars. But make no mistake, it is also managed by for-profit corporations. Last 72 hours, as Canada is grieving, and I hope that you'll join me after this webinar as we take a moment of silence across the country. Universities are leading this to think about those brothers and sisters of ours in this country that lost their lives. And you see here that GoFundMe canceled and shut down several of the campaigns to remember people. And who stepped up? A Canadian philanthropist and the Toronto Community Foundation to create the fund. And again, Edmonton, where most of these families live, the foundation, everybody is stepping up. It's our sector that, again, accountability, transparency, public trust. But for lots of nonprofits, I also have to say, and again, this is hard for me to say, we've got to be willing to lose. What if there's more money brought in by these corporations through the things they're doing? The PayPal Giving Foundation is a dominant source of revenue because it is plugged into Facebook. We have to look at these realities in 2020 and beyond, because we're not moving forward. Right, this year, yes, it's exciting in the holiday season. Our colleagues at the Salvation Army got tapped for the kettles, and I creeped out a whole bunch of volunteers by hanging out and looking at how donors were giving. Look, it's 2020. Drug dealers have tap. And here we are at our organizations and the places we are still asking for cash. We've got to catch up. And yes, maybe we're going to have to cede some of that control to these corporations. We're going to have to hold them to account. That's up to our organizations, again, like ONN, AFPs, Gift Planning Association. But we have to also have to be willing to find our way to the path of success. Social enterprise has been the darling and what a lot of people believe would be a panacea of the past several years. And it's been a struggle for a lot of organizations. We are now at a tipping point, an exciting time, where the government, municipalities, and our advocacy partners have realized that a vehicle exists for risk management, liability, governance, community effectiveness for social investment, and that is community foundations. Last year, I visited several dozen foundations. I have now visited over 100 of Canada's 191 community foundations across the country. And we have a new vehicle in the IRP, the Investment Readiness Program, rolling out this month. I've given you the link to it to understand it, to see how it's going to hit the ground in your community. If you want to start engaging more in this investment economy, in social enterprise, but you worry about the many case studies. Again, risk management, organizational, operational effectiveness, all the liability on you on reporting. Here you have a program that is going to be the vehicle for us moving forward. Now, I got to give a shout out on the fundraising side because that's what I do. But again, I often look to wisdom of people that have done it. I don't know how many people, quite a number of you in the Ontario Nonprofit Network will know our colleague Kathy Mann, who has worked with our community in CEGP for over 2 decades, and the fundraising community does a lot within small nonprofit. And she's just put out this incredibly robust explaining of ambiguous words that a lot of fundraisers like to use. The culture of philanthropy. We have to build fundraising programs. For nonprofits, what does that mean? For charities and organizations with proceeding, what does that mean? And Kathy has unpacked it. For leadership, management, operation, finance, fundraising. And dare I say, it's a much more organic approach. For people who don't like fundraising, Enabling the Ecology and Your Economy is a document we want to read, literally just put out in the last 72 hours. I've given you a link to it. It's an incredibly helpful read. Sorry, lastly, a couple of points out there for the new capital raising. We have a third sector at the table to raise money for us who doesn't work for us, and that is professional advisors. You know, when we talk about asset transfer, which is what we've been doing at the Canadian Association of Gift Planners for almost 30 years, you can't talk about stocks without interacting with brokers. You can't talk about bequests without interacting with estate lawyers, insurance professionals, financial advisors, bankers, and yet we haven't activated them in that last decade more than we have now in the past couple of years. We've been so excited to launch our foundation that will fund research and activity. We are grateful to partners like community foundations, public foundations that have empowered now research and activity and vehicles to engage and activate this third sector, who's all about capital. So we're giving you the link to the report we did called Doing Good for Business, how you activate your board members and advisors in your community for their business, for profit and purpose. We have also last year launched a brand new designation in Canadian philanthropy called the MFAP, Master Financial Advisor in Philanthropy, with our colleagues, the Knowledge Bureau and Education Body for Advisors, Inspire Philanthropy, our colleague, our leader, Brad Hoffman, who is engaged in corporate philanthropy. You will now see that MFAPs popping up in your community. Our graduates are starting to come out. And again, they are more dispersed in suburban and rural populations. The urban ones, we've got natural gathering groups, and we are collaborating with their bodies, advocates, CPAs, STEP, Family Wealth Exchange. You're going to see a new cohort of philanthropic partners. We hope to curate that for you. And lastly, for those of you, and again, this is much more for people on the phone for in finance than in fundraising, is that we have got the book that was created, the textbook for charitable giving in Canada, now over 25 years old, updated every year after the federal budget by our colleagues at Miller Thompson Charity and CEGP for fundraising practice. It is a 600-page book that is a PDF full of everything you need, templates, governance, receipting, administration. In the past 2 years, we've added fundraising information on the donation of cryptocurrency, of farm property, environmental donations, and it's super accessible now. It's within our organization and it's for you to get. So we've given you a link to that. And let's just finish up with a couple of notes on what we need to do. If there's anything, and I travel the country and listen to you, that we feel a yearning for, there's 2 things, just 2. The first is that we have not found the traction we need on these 2 important global and Canadian movements. The first is the Sustainable Development Goals. We don't see people investing in them, using them to shine the light through of their missions and truly invest. It's exciting to see more resources coming out of the Alliance 2030 and our colleagues at community foundations. I've got a podcast here for you called No Little Plans about how charities and nonprofits are doing it across the country. But if we start to use a more common understanding languages, let me tell you, corporations get it. Price Waterhouse, and I'm giving you a link to this, PwC has put out corporations and the sustainable development goals, a framework for the next decade, we need to double down on this as charities. And if we do, I can tell you, we will also see more progress on everything from advocacy to funding. And as Canadians, we talk about trying to embrace reconciliation and that Indigenous engagement, which people have a desire for, always asking, how do we do it? We have to move past asking how and get our hands dirty, and how do we do it? Who is the leader on that? Our colleagues at the Circle on Canadian Aboriginal Philanthropy. We've got leaders like Chris Archie, like Tim Fox in Calgary, who are leading the way, writing and speaking and engaging on everything from the Philanthropist, as you see here, to local podcasts, workshops, and all of it. We need to double down. The TRC has a lot of resources for the public. We are so blessed as a sector to have an internal community resource. We as the gift planning community are engaging them. The Ontario Nonprofit Network is deeply engaging them. We encourage you to figure out how to do so as well where you are so we can advance these. And lastly, if there's anything that I could say gives me great hope for the next year and the next decade, is actually how we are doing an amazing job of fighting the ambiguous darkness. Social media, social networking has never connected us more and never made us feel more alone. We know that. And yet when I see the progress on the very concept of gathering, this book, The Art of Gathering, is one of my favorite reads of the past year. I got it from the Globe and Mail nonfiction bestseller list. And then through social media, I discovered that this is the spouse of Anand Giridharadas. Holy smokes. But it is a brilliant book, and she's been teaching for years in this area. You know, a lot of us run special events, and a lot of us run gatherings and conferences. I don't know if you can sit in one more windowless room in the basement of a hotel. We've got to make gathering better. And through groups like the ONN, who have now seeded partner networks and things like CKNN, Chatham Can Nonprofit Network, the incredible leadership of Pillar Nonprofit, and now seeing the exciting work across the country of the PEI Nonprofit Network, the Alberta Nonprofit Network, who just did an incredible study of that province, its needs and its resources. And the conference I'm the most jealous of, I see you in BC, Vantage Point, and your BOSS Leadership Conference for Nonprofit. It's an incredible exercise. But likewise, we got a whole bunch of disruptors. I don't know how many people have seen all these people sneaking around with alternative conferences, with alternative networks, right? In Guelph, we've got the EDPG, and I'm excited to speak there next month to executive directors. We've got the Peel Leadership Center. We've got the Peel Good Summit in Winnipeg. Happy New Year next week in Burlington. Western Canada fundraising conferences. As part of the establishment, I'm CAGP. We should be not encouraging all these alternative gatherings, but this is what the future is. A lot more of us are going to be moving into the intellectual and strategy engagement, stepping back. Again, CGP's mission is simply to advance strategic giving in Canada. How we do that has got to become more flexible. So I've given you links to all these. I encourage you to think about how you engage alternatively in the places and the spaces, like CSI, Foundation House, Innovation Works in London, how we gather. And turn to the entities that help us to do it most. We are grateful. I am grateful to CFC and to the United Way Networks for being the community and corporate gathering partners, for Giving Tuesday, that is the virtual gathering partner for social good in this country. So let's get to Q&A. Thank you, everybody, for investing the day. My last point is this. If there is a prediction, now that cannabis edibles are legal, I do think that bake sales are going to get a lot more fun, and maybe AGMs will be tolerable. I will leave you with that. So thanks, everybody. And again, I'm going to give you the resources to share, and hopefully it can be of help to your group. And again, don't try to do it all. Cut and paste, share it. Funding, finance, all of that. And if all of those are you, don't try to do it alone. We're here to help ONN, myself, CGP, the network. We can hope to connect you with these folks. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Great. Well, let's start off with two questions for you, Paul. First question, going back to tax benefits. So a what if question. What would happen if Canada reduced the preferential tax treatment of charities?
So, one of the interesting things that ONN participates in is the Imagine Canada Sector Champions Gathering, where we ask these big questions. And they actually gathered a very interesting panel of social media leaders, and they asked that question. This is a very hard thing for me to answer because our Gift Planning Association represents charities and the taxation of charitable giving. But when we actually dream bigger to the future of social good, we do so much fighting on the minutiae and the treatment of tax benefits, and then Canadians, our donors, ignore it all. I'd love to tell you that the head will win. People come to our courses and they bring out calculators and they want to do 1 + 1 = 2. And in 2020, we tell them, no, competence comes through the confidence of conversation. If you can find your way between the head and heart, talking to donors about social good, what you do, how you do it, and they are now investors and partners, not donors, you'll get what you need to do and get where you need to go. Tax benefits, this is simply about that strategy. Again, the boomers, the civics, the advisors, that's their world. But it's social good. And for so many of you in nonprofits, especially when we look at crowdfunding, the public at all ages is telling us, I feel, I give. If you can make it easy between the head, heart, and hands, you're going to win.
Thank you. The next question is related to a recent article talking about how Canadians give, but it's at a 20-year low. Any comments about that? What are your thoughts?
It is, and again, when we look at the amalgamation of the data by Imagine Canada and the Rideau Hall Foundation, we're grateful to them to put together all of that StatsCan, Canadian receipt giving, and T3010 charity reporting to have a better understanding of that. If you want to dive deeper, that's the report to dive deeper to the data. But you're right, we look at the tax receipts, when we look at individuals giving, with giving's going down. And part of it is we have not taught what it means to give, generosity, and actually, again, the taxation. Who knows what to do with a tax receipt? The only people that do that are people who do their taxes, and who's doing their taxes anymore, right? So we have to look at a couple things. How do we reteach empathy and generosity? And then how do we actually reteach the mechanics of giving? And where does your organization connect into that? Because again, Tim Hortons, everybody's got TAP, and we're talking about taxation. How do people give you money? We still have people at special events with little index cards on a table, right? And writing their credit card information out, throwing it into the air, and maybe you'll process it in the next couple of weeks. You could process that before they leave the room. Get them, yes, a tax receipt, but also talk to the person that ever gave you $1,000 and all of a sudden randomly gave you 20 grand, right? This is where we've got to hack the systems and get deeper into this.
Great, thanks, Paul. So on another topic, thinking about rural versus urban differences, this is a question from John Ryerson. Isn't the problem that's not working with neighborhoods and helping create the brand of the neighborhood?
That's partly it. And again, this is something that Giving Tuesday unearthed. We started creating civic networks for Giving Tuesday by city. And now there's been another evolution. And again, it's not a backlash. It was supposed to start a conversation of giving days, giving groups. Look at 100 men who care, 100 women who give a damn, 100 kids who care. There's 1,000+ groups like this across Canada because people have reacted to saying mail and special events and gala and golf. We just want to gather. We want to talk about what we care about, and we want to give to that. Now, going on beyond just the heart, how does that get actually intellectually engaged? That's what vital signs in community foundations is for. It will then intelligently use the head to inform the heart and inform the hands about granting, about needs, the data of giving, and where there is a public deficit. And again, take a look at that Imagine Canada report on where there's a social deficit. It's got everything, including an infographic for your boss.
All right. And a question from one of your former colleagues, or one of your colleagues, Jacob. He's asking, are these millennial trends, giving trends, really new? It seems to me as if young people give in this way because they are young, whether it's the millennial generation or the upcoming younger generations.
It is a wonderful hobby to generalize, and we have enjoyed blaming millennials for the death of cereal and for the extinction of avocados. But if we actually dive into this, it's about age and stage, about how people come up, about how people actually accumulate and give away wealth. Look, we're looking at right now to say, what is a baby boomer, right? The number one thing that baby boomers have is iPads. What is an iPad? It's just an iPhone you could see. Well, what is a baby boomer? It's just a millennial with money and experience. We have to really look at this, not generalize, go deeper into our communities. We're seeing very different activity between rural, suburban, and urban. We're seeing very different network building in organizational size, charity, nonprofit. We need to leave the demographic, all of this, all the things we're doing with different generations in generalization. We need to go deeper and understand it. Again, we've got more of the data. We look at people like Environics doing the social and surveys around donor and public behavior. And again, this is what we are going to do now as Imagine Canada and as the Gift Planning Association. We are launching the largest nudge campaign, social normalization of charitable giving in Canadian history in the next couple of months. So you're going to hear about this from us and other partners. It's time to start really teaching again, but also for all those small local organizations to understand what's your market, what are your charity needs, and how do you respond with local problems. And again, not provincial, not even city, hyper local. And we're very grateful of people like CFC to do the work with StatsCan to understand what that means and how it's actually happening, not just anecdotally how we feel it happening. Because if we do anecdotal, we generalize, and then we get avocados.
So thinking about those, you mentioned the charity list, the top charity list. What can we do as a sector to get better at talking about our story as a sector, sort of better at combating that individual highlighting of organizations?
Indeed, it's a challenge. And no one more than me has been critical of these lists and the very exercise of list building. But you know, as I've learned with Giving Tuesday, where everybody seems to make it a hobby of dumping on something, I've been doing the same thing with these lists, and many of us have too. You know what? We haven't created a narrative. And so the only thing in that vacuum that's got good media buy-in, that's got translatability, that's got data that's shareable, is our colleagues who make those lists. And the number one organization in this country who makes those lists is itself a charity and is dedicated to trying to do it. But they have to understand, just like Anand Giridharadas, that they're winning because of the negative. And if you actually take a look at the evolution of how they've even expressed those lists, I got to give them credit. This past couple of years, they've added filters, regional, local, all of it. We have to bring people closer. Dialogue is the goal, not division. And so it's time for us to double down, engage them, learn how to talk about them. But again, local narrative will win the day. Vital signs, United Way reports, all of that of local as well. Your donors will hear more. And then we've got to go as sectors and talk to the list makers on how we have a better shared narrative together. It's time for us to do that. We can't rely just always on people doing it and then blame them because we don't like what they're doing.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for everyone for joining today. We hope that you were able to learn from Paul's expertise and his curation of all these amazing resources. If you are listening, don't worry, we are going to send you a copy of this webinar and the slide deck so that way you can review and really dive deep into all of Paul's recommendations. Thank you so much for joining, and we hope that you connect with us again on social media, join future events, and also consider becoming a member of the ONN. Have a wonderful day.